Hey everyone, it is me again, Andrew, the other grad student in this class, and my discussion is on how do you art? Or how do you go about making art? Like, how do you know what to do? And by the way, what you're seeing here is a picture of the piece that I made for our last assignment in this class. I call this one Chatroom, and so what you're seeing here is a kinetic sculpture, and it plays back messages from an archived Twitch stream. But first off, quite literally, if it's not a school assignment, how do you choose what to work on? For me, I have a design practice that has me creating web interfaces that bridge the gap between humans and our physical world and our physical environment with data and information from the virtual world or digital environments. And so my art practice is pretty similar. I'm looking for ways to also bridge that gap, but through kinetic sculpture instead of screen-based interfaces. So what do you do? How do you choose what you're going to work on? And then how do you decide the medium? How will you deliver the experience? So if it's a poster or a software application, a painting, a performance, how do you decide what it's going to be? In my design practice, my medium is decided for me by kind of my employer and society at large. I build web-based interfaces because that's what the masses know, right? That's what we use these days. We use our phones, we know apps. That's the thing that is hot in design. But in my art practice, I get to choose the medium, and I usually choose to make kinetic sculptures that do the interfacing between the physical and the virtual. And I do this in hopes of tapping into the additional bandwidth we have of our senses. So 2D screen-based UIs are mostly visual, but a kinetic sculpture, it takes space and it has presence and it moves over time and it might have sound and tactility and who knows what. And so I investigate how that experience might be different than an app. What can a kinetic sculpture do that a 2D screen can't? What materials make sense, either technically or because of their social context. And so how do you all decide on the medium and the materiality that you use in your work? And then what role does research play in your process? Are you doing something new that you've never done before? Then you probably have to do research. Is the work a reaction to something cultural, an event, or previous work of yours or someone else? How do you go about collecting information that helps you conceptually, aesthetically, or even technically? Like what material or software can help you achieve your goal and realize that project? Do you do ethnographic research? As in, do you go out into the world and study people where they are? I do this all the time as a designer, and designers should always be doing this. It turns out, what's the easiest way to know how people use your app? Well, you kind of just go and watch them use your app. And so people watching is very much a real form of research and super helpful when you're in the design world. Also, if you're doing research, like, does your research include other artists? Here's a work from Raphael Lozano Hammer entitled Remote Pulse. And so this one consists of two stations, the white object that the kid in the red shirt has his hands on. And so those two are placed, there's two of them. We see one of them, but there's two, and they're placed at some distance from each other, sometimes on the opposite end of the globe. And so person puts their hands on one station and the other person puts their hand on the other station, and they can feel each other's pulse. And so that's what the work does. But what does the work do? It connects people, right? Like you can feel a connection to somebody, and typically that someone is in another country or a culture or a way of life, and it doesn't really matter if you know them or can see them or even where they are. It's just in that moment you're both connected, and that's a really powerful thing. That's really great. And so what artists do you all connect to or are interested in, and why? How does their work kind of help your work along? And then where do you show your work? That's a tough one, right? Sometimes my work sits in my studio or it sits in my basement. I have lots of design projects and 2D prints that I've done that kind of just sit in a tote in the basement. Sometimes it does make it out into the world. If you remember my last presentation, several of my keyboards have been up at VAR Gallery for a few years now. Sometimes my work is just a video or a photo that someone scrolls past in their Instagram feed. And so what about you? Does your work just live on Instagram, or is it site specific? Is it a performance that comes and goes, and the only way to view it again is as documentation? And so, where do you want the work to go? Where do you want it to be seen? Where do you put it? What do you do with it when it's done? Well, and then I guess finally too, how do you know when a project is done? I gave Artist Now talk last year, and one of the questions in the QA was, because I do so many iterations, when do I know it's done? And I don't know. I don't really see a project as ever really being done. Like, what about the iPhone? When are they gonna be done with that, right? Like, they keep coming out with a new one every year. Why don't they just finish already? But seriously though, I do like to try to get my work into a place that is showable, because showing your work and getting feedback on your work is really the most important thing that you can do for the work. It's how you figure out where to go next. And like, that's key there, right? Like, where to go next. That's why I don't really ever see anything really as being done, because there's always something else to do the moment you show it to somebody. And so I work in prototypes or iterations, and these moments where I pause and assess and work and then show it to somebody, and figure out, what's working well, what's not working, and what's my work doing for the viewer. And when you show it to somebody, like, what feedback do they give you that you didn't even think about your own work? Like, they say something, you're just like, oh my gosh, I never even thought about it in this capacity or in this way before. That's what I'm going to do next. That's where the project is going. Forget my original direction. I'm going over there, because what that one person just said, or maybe even what this group of people just said, or maybe it's you're showing it over and over again, and the recurring theme keeps coming up over and over again, and you just never seen it, but everybody else sees it somehow. Oh my gosh, you have to show your work to somebody. And so I don't really, um, I call it kind of doneness. And so once I don't have to say the phrase to somebody, well, I haven't done that part yet, or I just haven't got there yet, or imagine it did this, or imagine it did that. Like, once you don't have to say that anymore, that's kind of when the work is done. And so what does that mean for you all? How do you know? How do you know? How do you know when the work is done? What does that mean to you? And so that's all I have. These questions and this presentation all live on Canvas. And so go check it out. Take a moment to answer a few of them. I'm always interested to see and hear how other artists and designers approach work and do work and maybe even finish work. And since those were pictures of a kinetic sculpture, I thought I would leave you all with a video of Chatroom so you could see it in action. Thank you all very much.